Okay, let's say our Asok B'divrei Torah blessing together. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kidshanu V'Tzivanu La'asok B'divrei Torah. Praise to you, Lord God, rule the universe, who's made us holy with your commandments and command us to busy ourselves with the words of Torah. All right. Yep. All these pop-ups. Go away. Okay. So we begin with a picture from Israel of Esther Hamalka Street on the bus line. This is what it looks like. Our prologue in our 8-act story about Esther. King Ahasuerus is the ruler of Persia, from India to Ethiopia. He has a big party. He wants his wife Vashti to come in her crown. Some commentators say only her crown, and show off her beauty before all the drunk men. She refuses, and the king gets upset. And his advisors say that if word gets out, then all the other wives in the kingdom will feel like they can say no to their husbands, and that would be a problem. So therefore, Vashti is no longer the queen. Some interpret that as she is killed, others as exiled. The text merely says that Vashti will never enter the presence of King Ahasuerus, King Ahasuerus, and somebody else will become the royalty instead of her. And the news went out about that. All right. Act 1, which is chapter 2. So the king decides that he wants to be married to somebody after all. So all of the beautiful young virgins in every realm of the province and every realm of the empire are to be brought to Shushan, the capital, and one of the women who gets swept up in the royal dragonet is Esther, Hebrew name Hadassah, and Esther declines the offered beauty treatments and just goes as herself, and nonetheless the king wants to marry her, so she becomes the queen, and she doesn't tell the king that she's Jewish as her uncle, cousin, Mordechai, who was old enough, significantly older than her, to the point where he was able to adopt her when her parents died, and he raised her.
Guardian.
So yes, he was her guardian. Thank you. And he followed his advice. Mordechai also spent time at the palace gate and overheard a plot to assassinate the king. So Mordechai tells it to Esther. Esther tells it to the king in Mordechai's name. This is the origin of the idea that in Pirkei Avot, that not plagiarizing, basically, like giving something b'shem omro in the name of the person who said it, leads to redemption. Because if Esther had not said that had not reported the plot in Mordechai's name, then some of the future events in the story potentially might not have happened, or at least a subplot definitely wouldn't have happened. So that was the end of chapter 2, that the assassins were foiled. And so we begin chapter 3. Norma, would you read chapter 3, please?
Sometime afterward, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite. He advanced him and seated him higher than any of his fellow officials. All the king's courtiers in the palace knelt and bowed low to Haman. for such was the king's order concerning him. But Mordecai would not kneel or bow low. Then the king's courtiers who were in the palace gates said to Mordecai, why do you disobey the king's order? When they spoke to him day after day and he would not listen to them, they told Haman, we have to shake our Gregor, in order to see whether Mordecai's resolve would prevail. For he had explained to them that he was a Jew. In other words, that as a Jew, he could not bow to a descendant of Agag, the Amalekite king, blah, 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 blah. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel or bow low to him, Haman was filled with rage, but he disdained to lay hands on,
Yep, sorry.
go up, need to lay hands on Mordecai alone, having been told who Mordecai's people were. Haman plotted to do away with all the Jews, Mordecai's people, throughout the kingdom of Ahasuerus. In the first month, that is, the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, Pur, which means lot, was cast before Haman concerning every day and every month until it fell on the 12th month, that is, the month of Adar. Haman then sent to King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the other peoples in all the provinces of your realm, whose laws are different from those of any other people, and who do not obey the king's laws. And it is not in your majesty's interest to tolerate them. If it please your majesty, let an edict be drawn for their destruction, and I will pay $10,000 of silver to the stewards for deposit in the royal treasury. Thereupon, I'm gonna find my place.
At the top.
Thereupon the king removed his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the foe of the Jews. And the king said, the money and the people are yours to do with as you see fit. On the 13th day of the first month, the king's scribes were summoned and a decree was issued. As Haman directed to the king's satraps, to the governors of every province, and to the officials of every people, to every province in its own script, and to every people in its own language. The orders were issued in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's signet. Accordingly, written instructions were dispensed by couriers to all the king's provinces to destroy, massacre, and exterminate all the Jews, young and old, children and women, on a single day, on the 13th day of the 12th month, that is, the month of Adar, and to plunder their possessions. The text of
There we go.
The
At the top.
text of the document was to the effect that a law should be proclaimed in every single province. It was to be publicly displayed to all the peoples so that they might be ready for that day. The couriers went out post haste on the royal mission, and the decree was proclaimed in the capital Shushan. The king and Haman sat down to feast, but the city of Shushan was dumbfounded. Context. This is chapter 3 of the biblical book of Esther. What might Esther be thinking during any part of this chapter? What might Esther be feeling during any part of this chapter?
Thank you.
Boy, things don't change much, right? People hated us then, they hate us now. Awful.
Am I correct in understanding it is if Mordecai was sitting by the gate, he wouldn't bow down. He was one of the courtiers.
Let's
No.
see.
Because he's sitting by the gate with the courtiers, and he doesn't want to bow down with the rest of them.
Barry?
I came to learn by a class that I had in Anshe Shalom. I'm not sure how long ago, either under Le Patton or Rabbi Wilkenfeld, that Mordecai was like the leader of whatever group that might have been similar to the Sanhedrin, the sages of the Jewish community at that time, which is why he was in the gates, which was how a lot of our sages used to gather in a minyan in front of the gates and pass regulations and decide things. And so Mordecai was also often in the gates for that reason. And the bowing down you already know about, as Norma described to us before, I think. That's what I learned. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of commentary on the matter. Going off of what is actually in the text in front of us, I'll go back and look at where it says that Mordecai was sitting. So the first thing that we see of Mordecai sitting at the palace gate is in chapter 2. At that time, when Mordecai was sitting in the palace gate, and we don't know why he's sitting there. There's no explanation given. He might be the gatekeeper. He might just like to hang out at the palace gate because there's a comfortable bench there. We don't know why. He just happens to be there. In Esther chapter 3, it says, all the king's courtiers in the palace gate knelt and bowed low to Haman, but Mordecai would not kneel or bow low. Then the king's courtiers who were in the palace gate said to Mordecai, why do you disobey the king's order? So you could read this and say, it says, all of the courtiers in the gate knelt and bowed low to Haman. Since it says all of them did that, and Mordecai did not, therefore Mordecai must not have been a courtier.
Except,
yeah, go ahead.
But we don't bow down to anybody else but Hashem. So you could be a courtier. I mean, there's folks when you come into the Senate or the government today, and you swear allegiance, you have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
Do what Bible or what book or whatever you use.
Right.
Now that doesn't mean folks are so liberal then as they are now.
Yes. My read of chapter 3, verse 2 is that probably he was not a courtier.
All right.
But I could see like a 49% likelihood, like a strong minority opinion, arguing that based off the same verse that he was a courtier. He was just the courtier that wasn't bowing down.
Yeah, but I can see where Barry says if you consider them a leader of our community there, that he might be sitting there to represent to the community's interests and or at least a sense what impacts any decisions would make on the community. So I can understand it from that.
Absolutely, that would be an explanation as to like what he's doing sitting at the palace gate if he's not a courtier.
David?
Yeah.
Maybe he's there because of Esther, just in case she needs him.
Mm-hmm.
Not just being a courtier, but just, as her uncle, because she's all alone in this palace and she's the only Jew there. So it's as if he's like there, like a safe, like he's her safe haven.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that would be supported by chapter 2, verse 11. Every day Mordecai would walk about in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was faring and what was happening to her. So it would stand to reason that, or sit to reason in this case, that he might be hanging out by the palace gates to be available, and because one can only walk back and forth in front of the court of the harem so long during the day. So, particularly because he might have been older by that point. So yes, that would be another perfectly reasonable explanation as to like what he's doing in front of the palace gates if he's not a courtier.
Mm-hmm.
But I think one thing that's important, whether he's a courtier or not, is that it's only Haman he's refusing to bow down in front of. It doesn't seem that he's violating any other social mores, or at least the text doesn't expose that. It's specific to Haman. So I would think if the king came by or other, royal personages or even other higher people in the kingdom where this order may be true of them, again, I don't know for sure, but the text is pointing out specifically that it's Haman he's not bowing down to for a very specific reason. I've always taken it that Mordecai conformed to the social mores of the situation. I could be wrong, but that's always been my impression. And it was specific to Haman that he refused to bow down because of his lineage.
So one could read it that way. I'm going to propose a possible other reading of the same text, that that Mordecai didn't kneel or bow low because he was a Jew, and that might have also been true if the king's order had been to kneel or bow low to anybody else. So if the king had wanted him to kneel or bow low to him, he might have also refused. So we don't see that he was disrespectful to the king, but he didn't. But one could read this text equally as saying he didn't bow low to anybody, and it was only Haman who was the one that was requiring him, or that the king's order said you must bow low to Haman. There are certainly scholars who point out the contrast between Saul, or Mordecai, who's from the tribe of Benjamin, and Haman, who is described as an Agagite, who is the king of Amalek, and how Mordecai's ancestor or ancestor cousin, Saul, tangled with Agag, and how all the Israelites, including the tribe of Benjamin, tangled with Amalek. And so some view this text as a sequel, I guess, to Saul versus Agag. Now it's yes, like a descendants grudge match of Mordecai versus Haman. That is a piece that has certainly been noticed by people. So
thank you, David.
Yeah. So the question I posed is about Esther's thoughts and feelings during this chapter. And I guess in order for you to be able to answer that question, given that Esther doesn't actually appear in this chapter, you're going to have to make a midrash, make a story about the text. How much, if anything, did Esther know? I'll give a spoiler alert that she did not seem to know about the order to kill the Jews. But other than that, like, do you think that she might have known about the Haman versus Mordecai issue? Or have had thoughts about Haman at all? So make up a story. What do you think?
I live in a condo building that is rife with gossip. I mean, I'm not a gossip myself, but it's amazing. The gossip that floats by, and even the stuff that I hear and don't make any effort to hear. So I would guess that in a harem, gossip runs like wildfire. And I also think, based on just histories, even in the medieval times of courts of kings and that sort of stuff, there was always a ton of gossip floating around. So my guess is that she's heard about this conflict through the gossip grapevine.
All right, the world's newest midrash. Other ideas? You can either say, I agree, or I'm not sure if I'd agree.
Yeah, I would say that I agree. I also think that Haman
strikes me as the kind of guy that talks a lot and talks very loudly. So I would imagine that if he's filled with rage, that would carry, and that Esther then, obviously knowing Mordecai, would be probably stressed out by that, but maybe want to listen and not act on it immediately and just pay attention.
Great, thanks. Alan, it sounded like you were going to say something.
Yeah, well, I think it's along the lines of what Stacy said. Esther's there in the harem. She's, in a sense, although she's surrounded by dozens, hundreds of other women and eunuchs and other people, she's really there alone. But she knows that she is different. And, she hears these rumors about her uncle, her guardian. And she had to be, I would guess she was afraid, she was concerned, but she couldn't act. And she had to hide it. She couldn't let on who she was and what made her different.
Okay. Other thoughts?
But as we mentioned before, that she had periodic contact with Mordecai.
Mhm.
So would there not be some source of information from the outside world?
Mm, mm.
Hmm. That would make sense.
I have a quick thought.
Yeah, Barry.
I'm thinking a combination of these things are good, and they lead me to a semi-conclusion without it being stated expressly, but putting a few things together, that Esther has the world on her shoulders now. She's like Atlas with the world on her shoulders. I'm pretty sure she's become aware of the edict that people bow down before Haman. I'm also pretty sure that she knows Mordecai won't. I'm also pretty sure that she's knowing that Mordecai's behavior and resistance to obeying that edict would make him the focal point of just about everybody, not only the Persians and the Agathites and whoever else were out there in the various provinces, but his own people for threatening for our extermination. So, I can imagine everybody rumoring amongst our people saying that Mordecai, what did you get us into? We got a duck. So I think she's worried about globally about her uncle and the Jewish people at this point, and I think she has darn good reason to be so worried.
Thank you.
My honor.
Other thoughts about what Esther might be thinking or feeling? Recognize that the text gives us very little to work with in this chapter.
Well, she could be scared. I mean, it's kind of a difficult place to be.
Like,
I'd be.
scared because she's married to a king who has shown a willingness to get rid of his former queen, and she's isolated from her former life, or scared for other reasons.
I mean, it could be that, it could be a lot of other things, to see the way this particular person behaves. And since she was probably pretty intuitive, she can see that the Haman guy was somebody to be afraid of.
Hmm. Great.
May she not have known about what was being planned through, we're talking about gossip before, and little bits and pieces of information.
Right.
Well, let's find out. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I was
Great.
silent for a while.
All right. So I'm going to screen share again, and then we're going to do chapter 4. And this will hopefully help answer Charles's question about whether or not she might have heard anything because of the gossip mill. There we go. All right, Gary, would you read chapter 4, please?
I am having a problem with coughing. I'd prefer not tonight.
No worries. We'll try you another week. I hope you feel better soon. Naomi, would you read chapter 4, please?
When Mordecai learned all that had happened, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes. He went through the city, crying out loudly and bitterly, until he came in front of the palace gate. For one could not enter the palace gate wearing sackcloth. Also, in every province that the king's command and decree reached, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing, and everybody lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's maidens and eunuchs came and informed her, the queen was greatly agitated. She sent clothing for Mordecai to wear, so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he refused. Thereupon, Esther summoned Hathach, one of the eunuchs whom the king had appointed to serve her, and sent him to Mordecai to learn the why and wherefore of it all. Hathach went out to Mordecai in the city square in front of the palace gate.
There we go.
And Mordecai told him all that had happened to him and all about the money that Haman had offered to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him the written text of the law that had been proclaimed in Shushan for their destruction. He bade him show it to Esther and inform her and charge her to go to the king and to appeal to him and to plead with him for her people. When Hathach came and delivered Mordecai's message to Esther, Esther told Hathach to take back to Mordecai the following reply. All the king's courtiers and the people of the king's provinces know that if any person, man or woman, enters the king's presence in the inner court without having been summoned, there is but one law for him, that he be put to death. Only if the king extends the golden scepter to him may he live. Now I have not been summoned to visit the king for the last 30 days. When Mordecai was told what Esther had said, Mordecai had this message delivered to Esther. Do not imagine that you, of all the Jews, will escape with your life by being in the king's palace. On the contrary, if you keep silent in this crisis, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another quarter, while you and your father's house will perish. And who knows, perhaps you have attained to royal position for just such a crisis. Then Esther sent back this answer to Mordecai. Go assemble all the Jews who live in Shushan and fast on my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens will observe the same fast. Then I shall go to the king, though it is contrary to the law. And if I am to perish, I shall perish. So Mordecai went about the city and did just as Esther had commanded him. This is chapter 4 of the biblical book of Esther. What might Esther be thinking during any part of this chapter? What might Esther be feeling during any part of this chapter?
All right, thank you. So, what might she be thinking? What might she be feeling?
Well, she doesn't want to die. And she must be, really afraid. Otherwise, she would have gone directly to the king.
And interestingly enough, she's taking charge. She's issuing instructions, and she has a plan that she's going to execute.
Yeah.
Rather than being the subjective to what others are, the actions of others, and submitting to that, and becoming the king's wife. No, she's taking action.
Showing a faith in God. She's declaring a fast for 3 days for all the Jews, basically. Even the ones in the court. Her and her own maidservant. She's invoking God into the deal.
I think it's ironic that her dilemma is completely the opposite of Vashti. Vashti was summoned and didn't come. Esther has not been summoned and is going to go. I think she has completely reconciled. And I think in all seriousness, she believes she will be put to death for this infraction. And I believe she's already given her life up in sacrifice in her own being.
That's a frightening decision to make.
Well, following on that, you may think that I have nothing to lose either way. If they know I'm a Jew, I might as well give it. Maybe there's a slight percentage, or maybe she didn't use percentage, a chance that maybe if I do this, risk my life rather than just wait for somebody to execute me, there may be something that changes.
Yeah, and I think the quality of life at this time would have to be not great to begin with. Not that it wouldn't make the decision difficult.
So here's a question. What do you think Esther is thinking when she sends clothing to Mordecai?
When we first read that, what it seemed to me is she's coming clean, in effect. She's saying to everybody around her, there's something between me and Mordecai, that Jew who's at the gate. And she had been hiding the fact that she was Jewish up until that point, but sending the clothing sends a signal, at least, that there's a relationship there.
Yeah, at least to at least to whoever she trusted to deliver it.
Yeah.
David, I have a question.
I also
Yeah.
I think she's acting like a queen. She's taking charge.
But it's My question is she aware of why Mordecai did it? Because after she sends him the clothing, but then it says she wanted sent the eunuch to Mordecai to learn why and wherefore of it all. So she obviously didn't know why he had done
I
it.
mean, when he came back and had gave her the information, then she took charge and acted
Yeah,
like the queen.
but when she sent the clothing, she didn't understand why
know.
he was
Right.
sackcloth.
Correct.
Question is about sackcloth. It appears to me that the one other bold appearance of sackcloth in my studies at every Yom Kippur time, I think it is Yonah and the people of Nineveh and the king of Nineveh, and when they hear about the decree that God is about to pronounce on the city, that the king gets into sackcloth and he tells everybody else to do the same and to repent. So Mordecai is taking this kind of action. And my first question is this around the same time that the thing's going on, or is sackcloth just a universal or a consistent way of showing repentance? That it's a visible repentance that, you know, God, we're humbling ourselves. We're getting out of our street clothes and we're getting into humility. And sackcloth and ashes is that visual expression of humility. So I'm not sure why Esther sends the clothes, but Mordecai is showing that. But the fast that Esther invokes is definitely a call to God. I think the sackcloth is too, but I think Esther's cry for a fast for 3 days is a pretty serious, hey God, here we are, come get us. I'm good, thank you.
Interesting. So were you trying to say something also?
No.
Okay.
I'm sorry that I couldn't make it on, get it on mute. My question is, maybe it's because, she thought maybe he's allowed to enter into the palace and, being in sackcloth with ashes, that it's unclean to come into to the palace and be in the presence of royalty. So that maybe that's why she gave him change of clothes.
Hmm.
And then my other question is, which also I was thinking about, I've been learning about this story for such a long time, is that now that she is the queen, it bothers me, like she doesn't even have the permission, even though she's the wife of the king, that she can't even go to her husband whenever she would like to. She just has to wait and be summoned in order to go and talk to him.
That's true.
I was thinking it has to be so frustrating that she can't go to Mordecai herself and try and smooth some of this over or like talk him down. Like it makes sense that she's the queen, that she can't go to meet with random people. But it would have to be so stressful to have the back and forth.
Yeah, she'd have to pick somebody to go back and forth whom she really trusted. Both trusted to keep the relationship between her and Mordecai, and also trusted to not tweak the message intentionally or unintentionally.
Yeah, definitely.
And my other question is, sorry, David.
Yeah.
So was she not able to go to Mordecai when he was, even though he was at the gate of the palace, but she had to send a messenger?
Yeah.
Yes, she was not allowed to go.
Correct. The queen could not just walk out the door of the palace, or walk to the door of the palace.
They were normally the ladies were in their harems or their separate quarters, and they were guarded and protected by eunuchs for a particular reason, but that would avoid any possible illicit physical contact. Make sure there's purity in the line of inheritance of succession, the royal succession.
Good job, Joe.
A few years ago, I saw a Korean movie called The Royal Tailor, and it's about, the royal family, etc. A lot of stuff. And although it's a different era and a different culture, I would recommend it because it really kind of brought to my mind what life was like inside, because the king had concubines, etc. And what it was like for women in some of these cultures, to exist. And that's when I think of what's happening to Esther, I remember that movie because of the relationship between the king and the queen there and the restrictions on her movements and, the other women in the court as well. Just an afterthought. If anybody wants, it's also a beautiful movie, beautiful clothes, but it's a great movie. So.
Thank you. Last thoughts on what Esther might be thinking or feeling during this chapter.
She realized somebody had to take action here. She said, you do the fast, I'll do the fast, my women will do the fast, then I will go to the king, though it's against the law. She took action.
Yep. And that's a good place to stop.
We're going to be